the people we're talking to right now have mastered their craft, but they still seem to have this inconsistency of leads. What kind of advice do you give to those kinds of people?
I think I could have been a lot further along than where I am right now if I just invested in myself sooner, or I learned sales sooner, or I learned to network better sooner.
Vice and Red Bull and like all of your portfolio of clients, they're like big names. Talk to me about your experience of like winning those clients.
They value efficiency, they value their time a lot more. They're not worried about money so much, they want reliability. But I've realized that if you're extraordinary, your word of mouth will grow.
Was it like working with Will Smith?
He's very... People don't buy if they don't trust you. They don't buy if they think there's skepticism around it working, and they don't buy if the price is not right. Those are the three kind of elements a buyer needs to have ticked.
So is there a process that you go through to figure out that person's like perception of extraordinary and then make sure that you're ticking those expectation boxes?
Well, I think
today I'm speaking with Timothy Fair-Matthews, who has been the personal videographer for Will Smith and Jay Shetty. He's also had huge clients like Vice, Red Bull, Aston Martin, and has been running his video production agency for more than a decade. I grilled him on how he's got to this point, how he's managed to get into circles that most people would dream of, and more importantly, what is the step-by-step process and what is the formula for winning corporate clients and higher value clients. I really think that you're going to enjoy this episode, whether you run a video production agency, a graphic design studio, or an animation studio. There are some really key foundational principles here to growing a business and finding better clients. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, please hit the subscribe button and share it with a friend. Was it like working with Will Smith?
he's exactly like you'd expect him to be. Okay. He's like his demeanor and his personalities that you see in the movies. Obviously, you don't know him personally, but he's very, he walks around on set, shakes everyone's hand. He's very, chill. He expects things done to be done correctly. So I've seen when shoots haven't been going 100% smooth, he does obviously make comments and expect a certain standard. I think any person that's a professional in their trade would. But no, he's compared to some. I mean, I've worked with some influencers, I won't name names, that are 10 times more diva than him. So
okay,
yeah.
And you worked with him on his Best Shape of My Life documentary, right?
The Will Smith relationship came obviously from a network that my business partner had, who's an ex-Bollywood director. His name's Rajiv Irani, and out of the US and LA contacts he has, there was an opportunity to work with his production company out of the US, Will Smith's one. And we originally started working, I think, back in 2017 on his bucket list challenge, which we did 3 out of the 6 episodes. We produced those. And then they've been back and forth a couple of times for some small things. But the next big thing that we did was the Best Shape documentary, which you said you saw. So that's when he climbed the Burj Khalifa, and we didn't do the whole series, but we did a portion of it.
Okay, where did all this start for you?
Okay, so I actually am not a trained filmmaker. I didn't study it. I actually am technically a motorsport engineer. My first filmmaking began when I was just documenting my hobby of kiteboarding. It's like kite surfing, but on land in the UK. About 16, 15 years old, had got given a really rubbish like Fujifilm Fine Pix point and shoot camera for Christmas. Had a video mode. It was like 2240p or something, 360p. I used to produce movies on Movie Maker and just document our hobby. The reason why that's relevant is I met a couple of people in that sport and I put content online. And by doing it back then, very few people were making videos of what they do in terms of their interest. And it got me sponsored. So even though it didn't click back then, what I put out got me results and got me awareness. So the visibility exercise for just putting out content when it was very, very new was a good thing. And then obviously I grew up, I was also interested in cars. I decided to study motorsport engineering. And then effectively after doing that, I was working at a race circuit where I ended up doing the media there, strangely enough, because they knew that I used to do my filming for kiteboarding. They thought, well, why don't you document some of the events here? So again, because I was visible online and people knew that I'd made content, they offered me it as part of the role that I had at the race circuit. And then naturally, again, accidental, but it was a very good network to actually put time and energy into. I mean, people in motorsport have to have money. So it was a good network. And I got to befriend, and again, not strategic, but just was trying to be as likable as possible. Gave a lot of value in terms of what I was doing. It wasn't about making money for me. It was just about making impact and just trying to get as much experience as possible. So I had good camera time, I had a good network, and then I ended up being in Dubai a few years later by working through a few high-profile motorsport-related clients. That's how I met my business partner, Rajiv. So I've got Peter in the UK and Rajiv in India, and came together to create First and 10 Dubai. So that's kind of how I got into it. Long story short, I mean, a lot more
stuff
tells.
in between.
A lot of stuff in between, but that's the kind of like the back of the cover version.
So one thing that strikes me immediately about just what you've said so far is the importance of network.
Yeah.
It seems like network has got you to where you are today. Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for a lot of creatives, that doesn't come naturally to them. They're not like people, right?
No.
Whether it's they identify as introverts or whether they are just like so into the creative that they kind of forget to look at the outside world, whatever. What are some fundamental skills that you think people need to have in order to build connections and network with the right people?
I actually do have a program which helps filmmakers grow, and there's a methodology that exists inside of it that I say should be your compass. And I call it ECV. It's extraordinary, credible, visible. You first of all have to make sure that you're extraordinary. And when I say extraordinary, I don't mean just like an amazingly well color graded shot, edited video. It's everything to do with the customer journey. And we don't think about that, I think, as business owners. This is just advice, just generically, if you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to grow anything, is like Daniel Priestley's laps. The start of the journey starts there. And then after laps, once someone's sold, you then have the phase in which you audit the plan and you put the blueprint together, and then you do the content, and then you deliver it. And then that content performs for that client. And then it's what happens afterwards. It's kind of like his, the product ecosystem, the gift for prospects and the product for clients and that sort of stuff. It's like that. But there is a customer journey that we need to focus and put time and energy into. And unless you're extraordinary at giving a good service, it's very hard for filmmakers to grow, because the majority of us get work through referrals and word of mouth. And you won't get good word of mouth if your product's not great. And the better your product is, the more premium and the higher you can charge, which means your margin's better, which then means you're not competing against the market, you're in your own market. And then, that kind of compounds from there. So the first thing is you need to be extraordinary. The second thing is you need that credibility to be documented. You can be great, but you need to also appropriately know how to leverage that and have a good digital footprint. And then the last thing is you need to be visible. And visible doesn't mean just posting on social media. That's only one way to market yourself effectively. But the irony is, I think content creation doesn't do very well for content creators. I think it's a good branding or social proof exercise, but it won't necessarily get clients. So where you should get clients should be probably a bit of direct outreach in the beginning. Content creation, good for branding, not really good for clients. Paid advertising, again, not really good for clients. It's our service is complicated. It won't necessarily work so well. Affiliates and partnerships is a big one, and then word of mouth. So out of the 5, I think 3 out of the 5 is where we focus our attention on. And networking is a part of the direct outreach, I guess, going to actual physical places. I mean, you have to shake hands and get to know people. Any service that's complicated, you need rapport and trust built from the person that's selling it. You can't do that over a post or social media. So networking is crucial for your growth. And also it's good for bringing in resources, potentially finding referral sources, like building generically a network and a support and an ecosystem. You know, without that, you can not go far. I don't believe, I don't think any filmmaker's got far without a network. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I've not done the research and I don't know if there's any way to capture that data, but I mean, it would surprise me.
I think it's a fair statement. Yeah. So for anyone that isn't indoctrinated into the Daniel Priestley ecosystem, which for my listeners is probably not that many people, because talk about it a lot, but you talked about LAPS, which is really about leads, appointments, presentations, sales. So correct, what you mean there is like your marketing engine, basically. Yeah. And then you talked about product ecosystem, which is like what happens to actually take people through those steps.
Yeah.
Right?
So I mean, if you had, I treat like I do A, B, C, D, E, F. It's really easy. So audit. What do you do to audit any potential project or relationship? What's going to happen? What do you do to audit the client, make sure everything's correct? And then what's the blueprint to follow that audit to kind of set the scope? Then it's the content, then you deliver it, then the exposure happens, and then you finalize and report on everything. And then the process repeats. Okay. So for me, it's a very easy way to remember, like it's sort of the blueprint to a foundation of a customer journey. And we should, I think, as entrepreneurs and creatives, work out how do we make that as extraordinary as possible. And that's a fantastic way for you to grow, because you're only as good as your last job, as they say. And if you do an amazing job, word of mouth happens and it's free sales. It's free business development. Why would you not do that? And which is where like it's a bit of a paradox sometimes, because it teaches you to almost sometimes not sell or not serve someone if you don't think there's a need or requirement. And that comes from LAPS. So as Daniel Priestley talks about, if you don't qualify and discover your clients appropriately between appointment and presentation, you shouldn't present to them. Simple. You don't sell to people that don't need the service. A lot of filmmakers, again, don't do that. They don't know the sales skills. They don't know the networking skills. Therefore, it doesn't matter how hard they work. And I've learned this the hard way. I did 6-7 years in this country, probably wrong. I mean, I learned a lot of lessons and I wouldn't be where I am without it. But I mean, I think I could have been a lot further along than where I am right now if I just applied some of these theories sooner, or I invested in myself sooner, or I learned sales sooner, or I learned to network better sooner. It's all come at a price.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. For those people at home scribbling down notes and rewinding that bit of the podcast and trying to listen to it on 0.3 times speed.
Yeah, sorry.
Can we just break the ABCD? Is it ABCDE or ABCDE?
ABCD, A to F, basically.
A to F. Okay. Yeah. Like the notes on a piano scale.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Okay. So A, did you say was audit?
Yeah. So like, obviously when you go into a project, you obviously want to just understand as much as you can about the prospect.
Right.
Because otherwise you're hired to do a service, which is to move the needle on something in their business. So the audit process needs to begin. Then the blueprint is obviously the kind of documented plan of action, like a blueprint for an architect. You can't build a building without a blueprint.
And is that something you're sharing with the client?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like a treatment, or like for me, it'd be a treatment. For like a social media agency, it might be like a social media strategy, content plan. It will obviously vary depending on what you call the asset, but there needs to be some sort of blueprint effectively. And then you've got the content, which is the pre-production, production, and post-production, which is everything that every filmmaker knows. That's obvious. I mean, that needs to be good. But as you can see, it's only one small part of the whole journey. Then you've got the delivery. So how is that content delivered? Do you send it over online? Do you care about how it's delivered? Is there any quality check or any extraordinary service there? And then you have the exposure. So the content's live now. It's doing its job. What exposure is it getting? All content's supposed to do is generate attention. Sometimes for sales, sometimes to save time, sometimes to save money, sometimes just to build rapport, sometimes just a brand build. So is it doing its job with the exposure element? And then after the job's done, how do you finalize everything? Do you go back and get feedback? Do you try to learn from it? Do you try to continue the relationship? What's the ending? A lot of and even I used to do this. I used to get my money and the client had their asset and I would forget about them. And then I might get an email back in 2 years or 6 months or 2 weeks, and sometimes not at all. And it's amazing how we're so fascinated sometimes on acquisition of new clients, but we don't nurture our current. So that's another reason. So for me, that's just a really good little tip anyone can leverage to kind of form, okay, what am I doing in my journey with customers to kind of improve it? And obviously I'm experienced in filmmaking. That's why I kind of...
Yeah. It's a lot, isn't it? Like, if you think about the difference between like, say being a freelancer and a business, when I was freelancing, I used to just think like my job is to go in there and do the job. And like, that is where it ends. Whether it's like you're going into another agency or whether you get a client, you're like, I'm here to build the website, to do the thing. But what you're saying really is if you want to grow, it's like about way more than that. It's about the whole customer journey. But it's hard enough, especially with like AI and everything, making sure that the content that you're creating is good enough. And do you know what I mean? Like, how are we keeping up with the cutting edge content now? Like, does this look good, or can AI just replicate this in 10 minutes or whatever? So you've got that, and that's almost like a full-time job. And then you've got to think about all the other steps. So like, how do you deal with that?
You've only got a certain amount of hours in the day, and that's why you need to leverage things correctly. Any freelancer will struggle to do and behave like a business properly without a team. But the goal of every freelancer, I mean, you're still a business. So you still got to have the elements like businesses do have, but you just don't have maybe the support and infrastructure and responsibility like a big business would. But you've still got to have a good understanding of how you can serve your customers the best way. It's just, I mean, there's so many phenomenal filmmakers that I know that just don't get much work because they just don't know how to sell themselves. I've got a photographer in the UK, he's a dear friend, probably one of the best photographers I've ever met, but he is not amazingly busy with work because he doesn't network and sell correctly. And he's he's a bit older and treats his, says that he's just not the world is beyond him now sort of thing, and it's a shame because like he is the world's best kept secret, which I think a lot of people are.
Yes. Yeah. And it's I think you're speaking to like a mindset and a belief there in that particular example, but also it's just like some really simple things that you get taught when you work in like sales roles or something that as a creative just aren't second nature. And one of the things that I'm thinking about specifically is like this idea of your little black book and just rotating it and just being that person who's constantly in touch, who's like, whether we give Tim work or not, we love chatting to Tim because he's always got new ideas about our campaigns or our business, or he's always checking in with us and seeing how we're getting on. He sent us a little gift. And really, like, to grow a successful film business, you only probably need 50, 100 people in your entire network to rotate and give you a couple of projects a year to have a really successful business. But it's like, how do we do that when we get busy on a job? How do we still like keep those people active and warm?
So it's a 2 steps forward, 1 step back in business all the time, right? I mean, it's never this, it's up and down, up and down. And sometimes you go further back than you want to, and sometimes you get further along than you expect to. So it's just a case, I think, of when you're at a max capacity, providing you're smart with your money and you look after your finances correctly, which again, I learned the hard way in the early years. Having a buffer, for example, is very important for your headspace, because you need to sometimes say no. When you're really, really busy, you need to potentially entertain the idea of increasing your prices, but increasing your value with it. If you're at max capacity and you think you're about average market rate, maybe it's an opportunity to increase your prices. But there'll only be a certain amount that the market will pay for you unless the value is there. You know, Alex Hormozy talks about this. I saw this video the other day. He says, you have your costs, you have your price, and you have your surplus, and the surplus is in between the price and the value of what the client gets. And you want these 3 sections spread as much apart as possible. And that's what you need to try and do. Every business should aim to be as premium as they can be and above the market rate, so to speak. And that kind of helps you from stopping to get busy, I guess. But it's a fine balance, because you do decline work, or revenue does fall off when you go into this chapter. Some people say 9 times out of 10 you make your money back and it ends up being better, but I have seen that also go wrong. And that's,
what do you mean by that?
Well, people like, if I tripled my prices tomorrow, then maybe 60% of my revenue wouldn't be there next year.
Right.
But I might make a lot more money, but it's hard to say, and it's a bit of a gamble. And if it ends up going wrong, I can end up making no money. And if you don't have a buffer to weather that experiment, so to speak, in your business, it could be quite catastrophic. So you do need to, obviously there's a balance to this, but that's just one thing I would say to help get time back. I mean, time is finite. You can only do so much, which is kind of the point of what you said, which I completely agree with. You can't do everything. You're just going from problem to problem to problem. And what problem is more important than the other problem? Yeah. Just problem solving.
Yeah. Talk to me about corporate clients. Like, and when I say corporate, I don't just mean big names. I mean big names, big budgets. Like a lot of people that I've worked with who run film production studios, realistically, their minimum project value is like between $30,000 and $50,000. Like if they take on anything less than that, it's kind of not worth their time because of the size of their team and the stuff that they're doing. But they really struggle to A, find those kind of clients consistently, but B, it seems to take forever to try and get one of those projects across the line. Like, how have you managed to get Vice and Red Bull and like all of your portfolio of clients that are like big names? Talk to me about your experience of like winning those clients and how you approach business development with those kind of clients.
Okay, great question. So I think more than 2/3 or half, at least, to say, it does vary from year on year, comes from agencies. So I'm working with an agency. Okay. Therefore, my pitch or sell or how I operate is very different if I was working with a business. Right. So there's 3 types of clients, I call it. I'm just going to deviate away a little bit so it has context for what I'm going to say next. But there's obviously B2C, which we know in this case could be like a bride, a B2B, which could be, like Emirates, for example, working with them directly. And then you have a B2A, which I don't think we tend to talk about or no one really kind of mentions, which is an agency, which is a business, but the value is different. You're dealing with a middleman that's between you and the end client. Yeah, it's like a delivery partner. Exactly. Yeah, they don't care about the strategy behind your service. They just want you to be good quality and do lots of it. So quality and quantity, I call it, which is the same as a bride. So an agency and a bride are kind of pitched the same. They don't really care about the metrics of what the needle move is on the investment of the asset. They've got that sorted, or maybe they don't care about it. Like a bride doesn't care anything about other than just capture my special day to the best you can in the best way possible with lots of content. When it's a B2B, you have to tie it to strategy. And I think what's done well for us is our portfolio is good. So that installs a large amount of trust. That's kind of like helped us get through the door. And we are strategic, but we tend to avoid working with brands that I would say don't know how to make content work for themselves, because I've been stung by this in the past. So like if a business has not done content before, doesn't matter how deep their pockets are, I have reservations about taking them on as a client, because content is a very hard thing to link to ROI. Right. Because how deep do you go? Like with content, you get attention, cool. But if they don't leverage that attention correctly, if their sales team don't leverage the awareness, or you don't link it to something, or if you don't if you don't leverage all this awareness, then which you're not responsible for, then the investment's wasted. We do work with a lot of big corporates, but again, we're working with teams kind of inside those brands. So we're not really responsible for the strategy. So I think what just helps us get in this type of work, going back to your original question, is it's just kind of our portfolio. That's kind of been really good to install the trust. Most of it's come through referrals of working with other people and networking events. I mean, Dubai is very small. I mean, you can go to one networking event and be surprised who you'd bump into or who you know at the event that knows someone big. So that's also helps quite a lot. Yeah.
Okay. So to start with, if someone's trying to get these like bigger budget gigs or they're trying to get bigger brands on their portfolio, it might be advisable to try and pitch an agency rather than pitch direct to
Absolutely,
client.
yeah. I mean, agencies, out of like the 4 Ps to content, plan, produce, publish, promote, which Raj Katetra, friend also, Daniel Priester, by the way, we produce. We don't do the other 3. Agencies would do the other 3 or sometimes all 4. But if an agency's hiring us, we're taking the heavy lifting away from them just in producing the assets. So, but because they do a 4P service, big corporates will normally lean on agencies to handle their content. Filmmakers very rarely get their foot in the door with the big corporates because they don't offer a turnkey service. You'll find that big companies either have a team internally, and if they're very, very on it and good, they will venture out and go to independent production partners. But most of the people in Dubai, for example, because the talent pool is so small, they will just lean on an agency, regardless of how the service goes, actually. I mean, I see a lot of badly run agencies here.
So talk to me about the relationship dynamic that's different between B2B and B2A, because a lot of the complaints I hear from creatives is like they've been doing it 15, 20 years. They do actually understand quite a lot about the strategy, and they often get brought in right at the last minute when it's like, we just need you to do this. And I know from personal experience, you know, I worked in loads of different agencies when I was a freelancer, and you can sometimes just feel a bit like a creative gun for hire. And it's like, oh, you would do this thing, so point this here, and someone's giving you all this creative direction, and you're like, do you even know what you're really talking about? Like, they've been put in that position for whatever reason. Do you experience that? Have you experienced it? If so,
all the time.
How do you deal with it?
It's kind of like, I'm going to be a bit of a hypocrite here because I say that you shouldn't take work on that you know you can't deliver the value, but if an agency's hiring you and you're right, you're just the gun for hire, it's up to you whether you want to take on that work, knowing that it may not be successful. But if you're not responsible for it, then it's fair game, I think. Providing you maybe flag it or just address or give your professional opinion, providing you're respectful, because your client's the agency, it's not the end client.
Right.
So they just want a frictionless, very smooth, their own customer journey. So yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I do get it a lot. Sometimes we walk away, sometimes we don't. I think it depends on the case-by-case system. I mean, I'm sure you've been there as well, right? Where you've been there and you've had people potentially, I mean, you came from an agency background, didn't you?
Yeah.
So did you experience this when you were hiring suppliers? Did you ever hire vendors and go through that?
Yeah, I really struggled. So when I first started my web design business, I couldn't really get enough clients to like match what I was getting paid in my agency role, because it was a full-time role. And so what I ended up doing was I had like a handful of private clients, which were generally kind of small businesses. And then to just supplement my income, I managed, because I had a very in-demand skill set, which was basically front-end web development and design at the time. I could go into an agency for a week and get paid £300-400 a day. And that week would cover all my bills for the rest of the month.
Right, yeah.
The thing I struggled with was there was a real ceiling, charging day rates. There was a real ceiling between what people would accept. And I remember like the highest day rate I ever got, and it was for a very big corporate that was obviously paying the recruitment agent or the agency agent like way more than that. So for me, it was twofold. It was number one, how people treated you, and feeling a little bit like my value is a skill set rather than all of the other kind of knowledge that I have about the creative process. And the second thing was feeling like there was a real ceiling to what I could actually earn and what I could charge.
But you're not responsible for the strategy. That's the thing. You can't link what you're doing for value. You're just a cog in a clock of cogs.
Yeah. And I think that's what I struggled with. Yeah. And I think I've always, personally for me, I've always struggled with that concept because I've always been like a big picture thinker and a big picture person. So to just like slot into somebody else's process or vision is really difficult for me. And I think a lot of creatives feel that. But is that not something that you've kind of, that not an itch that you've had? Are you quite happy just to take creative direction and focus on the
So we're
delivery.
balanced. We do B2B work and B2A work. And
Right.
the B2A, you could say, is the peaks and troughs and the big revenue with the terrible cash flow problems that come with it, but they pay very well and they're worth doing. But it's not sustainable if you only do that. You need to balance it with B2B. I think the hidden magic we have as filmmakers is if we can learn to serve as many B2B businesses as possible that we know we can give ROI with our content, then you're onto a winning business model. But content is very, very hard to scale. It's creative, it's subjective. You can send 10 cameramen to the same event and you'll get a different video from every person. How do you systemize that? You can't. So you have to systemize everything else. And it does require a team and an infrastructure. And for you to get a boring, predictable revenue, residual income business, you have to learn how to link it to strategy. Because effectively all you're doing is you're 1p out of the 4. Unless you learn to consult on the 4 or do the 4, it's very hard to scale.
Yes.
There is one alternative way to scale. I mean, so basically what I'm saying is you either become an agency or you grow a business that an agency might use. You might grow a business that an agency might merge or acquire you later. But the only other way I think you can scale as a filmmaker is actually to become like the 1% filmmaker, is to be so good and so premium at what you do and so niche that you can charge, pardon my French, FU money to whatever you want to do. And then that extra income you make above other people, you can use to compound into other things. Other than that, you'll always be trading your time for money. And that's the problem with filmmaking. It's not a very good industry to you to make immense wealth with. It has immense potential, but it's very complicated.
How much of that top 1% do you think is driven by connections versus talent?
Well, I mean, if you had to take, again, I don't know this, but if you had to assume the most highest earning filmmakers in the world, probably a large proportion of them would come from Hollywood, which is very cliquey and all built around network. So I'd say everything. I'd say 100%. I'd say 90% is a network. 90%.
So what have you learned? Because you touched on this at the beginning and gave that framework, which I thought was really useful. But let's just come back to this for a second. Like, what have you learned by rubbing shoulders with high profile people like Will Smith, Jay Shetty, like all of the people that you've had a chance to kind of be in circles with? What have you learned about building relationships with connected people? People
like that, they value different things. They value efficiency, they value their time a lot more. They're not worried about money so much. They want reliability. They don't want you to take the piss. But I've realized that, again, it goes back to that ECV methodology. Again, if you get it right first, extraordinary is the goal. If you can deliver an extraordinary service and you just know how to network and fee as well, and you do that, everything kind of takes care of itself. And then as soon as you get your foot in the door with the right person, it's amazing how a plethora of work can come from one source when you link it back. I think we can all do that, the butterfly effect, right? We can always think about, oh, that one client got me this into production and then that led to this and then this led to this. And you link it back and you think, goodness me, if I hadn't met that one person, I wouldn't be where I am right now. And I can do that with probably like 10 people. If I hadn't done my kiting, I wouldn't have ended up at the race circuit. I wouldn't have ended up in Dubai. So it's amazing how like you can go back as far as you want, but I think it really is so important that when you try to think of the celebrity angle, it's no different to the lower end. It's just what they value is slightly different, but ultimately the blueprint's the same. If you're extraordinary, your word of mouth will grow. And the bigger the person, the larger the network they have. And again, it compounds into so many other things. Like my work that I do with these guys, even though it's far and few between, it helps credibility across nearly every job that I do. I mean, everyone knows that we've done this work. So again, it's helps with the selling. I mean, people don't buy if they don't trust you. They don't buy if they think there's skepticism around it working, and they don't buy if the price is not right. Those are the three kind of elements a buyer needs to have ticked before they purchase. Yeah. You take that trust away straight away if you have a good portfolio.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. How does somebody become extraordinary? Because surely that is subjective in a sense of like what I think is extraordinary or remarkable, maybe you don't. So is there a process that you go through to figure out that person's like perception of extraordinary and then make sure that you're ticking those expectation boxes? Well, I think, yeah, I mean, there's the obvious extraordinariness, I guess, that you can put into a business, like over delivering on the prep, turning up on time, branded tops, nice gear, like over deliver. But to do a really, really good job, you've got to just know the prospect or the client you're serving inside out, which is where niching comes in. Right. So people tend to pick niches, I think, too early. I think it's good to focus and try to understand a certain niche or a market to get data, but ultimately your niche should be dictated to you later on once you've got enough industries or experience behind you. I agree. Because niching should be determined from what pays you and what you enjoy, and those two factors alone. Because there's no point you doing something you really, really enjoy if it doesn't pay you, which I have a lot of filmmakers that I mentor,
oh, like one, like, I love doing music videos. I'm like, cool, but like, what's your track record of that paying for you?
Yeah.
Oh, not a lot. And I said, how many have you done? Oh, about 40. I was like, well, maybe you should. That's a lot of time. That's a lot of time you've invested into that. So it's that sort of process, really.
Okay. Let's just unpack this a bit more.
Yeah.
Because I want to assume that the people we're talking to right now have mastered their craft.
Right.
So they're amazing at like video production or branding or whatever it is. They've got some clients on their portfolio that give them some credibility. They've probably even won some awards.
Amazing. Cool.
Right. But they still seem to have this inconsistency of leads. And it's like, shit, where's the next project going to come from? What kind of advice do you give to those kinds of people?
Well, I would definitely pick up a book and read about Daniel Parisi stuff and learn laps.
Yeah.
Because when you've got your laps data and you measure and you start measuring like my client acquisition source out of the 5, direct outreach, content creation, paid advertising, affiliate partnerships, word of mouth, out of all my 1 contacts, what was the most, where's the volume coming from? And then also put down in the information of the laps, the industry. What industries are made? I mean, your laps board will automatically give you your niche.
Yeah.
So, and then once you've got that sort of data, realize, and then you've organized it by top paying clients, then you're maybe able to just look at yourself from a outsider perspective and go, does my portfolio reflect exactly what this niche wants? And you'll find that, you know, the saying, if you're for everyone, you're for no one. This is where like niching does help, because the more you can understand the pain points of the client that you're serving and the better job that you do, which can only come from knowing them very, very well, that's when business tends to come through quicker. And there's no real easy way to there's no quick fix to say this gets you more leads, because it can be different for every person on the planet. Everyone's different at selling. Everyone's different at building rapport. Everyone will execute a job slightly differently. But this exact method here that we've just explained and laid out would give you the results that you need to know where to focus your attention.
Yeah.
And I'd be very surprised by doing this wouldn't bear any fruit, because you'd start first of all by nurturing the leads that are already there, just picking up the phone and just going for a coffee and genuinely having no intention to sell, but just to get feedback, build rapport, see what makes them tick. And then that exercise can help you maybe coin a new product. Maybe you can develop a product in your ecosystem.
Yeah. Or at minimum, at least understand some of those needs and frustrations a bit more, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or maybe you realize that you could have done a lot more on the job to make it more extraordinary. Again, you just need to be going back to the blueprint all the time of your own business. How do I make myself better? How do I make myself better? And how do I become the best at this? And if you can find, this is why I believe there's so much opportunity with content everywhere. Every brand effectively needs it, but the most beneficial ones are the ones that have the money for it and that you can make the most impact with.
Yeah. And that's like the concept of your ideal client, right? Because not all values created equal. Like you said, you could do this exact same thing for a different client and one gets incredible ROI and the other one doesn't see the needle move at all.
Truffles to pigs.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Talk to me about AI. Yeah. What have you seen in the AI world that you think might disrupt the film industry or creative industry at large?
Branded advertorial pieces are under threat because you can create renders and beautiful stylized assets now very easily with AI, and that's only going to improve. But I think it won't replace things like the here and the now. Like people will need content for events and live coverage and that sort of stuff. So I don't think that's under threat. I think it will hinder things, but I think it will also grow things. Like putting together storyboards now are very easy. Like we can use Midjourney and put together beautiful storyboards that otherwise I would have spent £3,000 sterling developing just to get the client to approve the concept. Now I can do it in an afternoon. That's amazing. Checking like even speed of responding to client emails and reviewing decks and things. Like I can literally dump an RFP into ChatGPT and say, please summarize this from your own perspective. Even though I've gone through it, it's not a replacement. It's just a tool to enhance. Like your speed of service can go up. AI is fed into the camera technology now. It's very quick and easy to now, it understands what it's looking at. It's not just looking for an eyeball. If it's tracking an eyeball and the person turns around, the camera doesn't have Alzheimer's like it used to and go, oh, what are we looking at?
Yeah.
It knows that you were filming a person and they've probably turned around. So this AI technology is now helping you do your job better, which means that you're faster on set. I mean, you could go on. I mean, effectively, technology is becoming cheaper. AI is making it easier to execute. I mean, even this podcast, you can have AI software now detect and provide all the captions. It can cut all the gaps out. It can cut between the cameras of who's talking. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, the time you save is huge. So it gives you more time to be extraordinary in other areas. So I think there's an opportunity for you to leverage it. And you can't complain, I think, that it's around and what do we do to stop it or get around it, because
it's here.
It's here. It's like, oh, we need to keep the libraries open just because the internet's around. We need to keep the libraries open. It's like, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah,
Time's moving on.
Yeah.
And it's going to get fat. I mean, it's going to be overtaking the content industry very, very soon. But you just got to learn how to leverage it, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you see any threats?
I think soon we're going to have a wave of social content already is actually at a point now where I think it's so high production value. Go back 10 years ago, people were not doing the podcast like we're seeing right now, like what you're watching. People were not seeing the trends, the production value of ads, like everyone's up their game. Soon that's going to be like, we're going to have so much content absorbed, it's going to be hard to stand out.
Yeah.
And then obviously people are going to be able to do it prolifically because AI can make things faster. So soon I think it's going to become so noisy, it's going to almost lose its attention in a way. I feel that's one thing that's under threat, but I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say. I think if you adopt it and try to find a way to make it work, I think providing that you're smart with it and you know AI's limitations and you look at how is content still relevant with what I do currently, it can be I think it can be an amazing thing. But I think if you focus on, oh, I'm worried about this, I'm worried about this, then it's the wrong approach. I think you just have to know how to sort of predict it. But it's I don't know. It surprised me what's come out of the woodwork in the last 5 years with AI.
Yeah, insane,
and
right?
I can't even begin to fathom what it's going to be like 5 years from now, let alone a year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You said something interesting there, is that like you can use AI to help you become more extraordinary. And it reminded me of a kind of like thought I had before when you were talking, which was this idea that there is a certain point that people get to in their creative craft, I guess, where they've been so focused on the craft, filmmaking, branding, animation, that they actually forget that there's a customer with needs and wants. And like, there's this whole process that happens. And I remember it, especially with websites, when like websites were a lot more popular, say 5 or 6 years ago. It's like all of a sudden, oh my God, if you don't have an amazing website, you're going to go out of business. And I was just like, well, people need websites and I make websites, like perfect, you know? But then when the market becomes sophisticated and things start catching up, and then all of a sudden there's a Wix web builder and you can do it yourself or whatever, it's like, oh, well, if I need a website, I just go to this thing. And then you're like, oh God, what do I do now? And then you realize, and working with people like Daniel Priestley, that I'm focusing on the wrong thing. Like I'm in love with my craft or the product rather than being in love with the customer and their problems and pain points, and thinking about how I use all of this stuff collectively to solve those problems better.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering, like, is there anything that you use, like a model, because you've talked through lots of frameworks today, like is there a model or anything you use or anything that you do in your kind of film coaching that allows people to focus more on the customer rather than the film?
I would say no, because I think probably the best thing to do is really just fully understand what the point of the asset is, and really imagine you don't need the business, you don't need the money, it's all about impact.
Right.
And I think if you have that approach, that's probably the best advice I can give, because what it does is it forces you to look at it completely from an efficiency, value for the client, and then it's part of the extraordinary journey. So I think that, I don't know if that kind of answered your question, but that's kind of like what I would say.
Well, my next question to that is, how do you measure impact? What do you mean when you say impact?
Well, if you say, okay, you're hiring me to do this production, let's just say it's a furniture store wanting to hire me to create an asset to give their sales team a video to help them send that to warm prospects. Maybe they serve B2B clients, so they maybe fit out hotels, hospitals or whatever, and they want an asset that their salespeople can have to go to market with to increase revenue. You would tie that then to revenue, and you just need to get good at understanding how content can link to that. And finding a way where, okay, so if imagine I'm part of your team now and I don't care about the money, what do we do to maximize the return of investment here? Yeah. And you'd go into the specifics, like, what's your top salesman doing? Okay, $100,000 a year. Okay, what's my worst salesman doing? Okay, $10,000 a year. Okay, so there's $90,000 as a deficit there. How many salespeople do you have? 10. Okay, so there's $900,000 worth left on the table here. So that's this asset, if it can move the sale 10%, that's a lot of money. So it's like, you just got to, and then you just got to think about the 4 Ps, the publishing and the promoting. So what is going on there? And I think if you just take more initiative and more interest in how your client gets clients, or what your client's trying to do with the asset, that's a way for you to be extraordinary, because you're going above your role. Like BMW, they make a car, and I think even Precy's talked about this, like the Pirelli tires are not made by BMW, they bring it to the table. So you are being hired to do one of the 4 Ps, but just be aware about the other 4. They're illiterate, they don't know anything. They're coming to you because you're an expert. So wise yourself up, read a book, go study, do a course, befriend some social media people, go form some partnerships, get an agency to work with you. Say, I've got clients that might need some extra publishing and promoting support. You don't necessarily need to learn the skill, but you need to be able to bring it to the table.
Yeah.
So that's
at least the awareness. Yeah, I think so. There were 2 things that changed my perception on this. The first one was like, what is the outcome the client actually wants? So rather than stopping at, hey, Matt, I heard you make websites, and me going, oh yeah, I do. Can you build us one? Yeah, probably. This is how much it's going to cost. Being like, okay, Tim, like, why do you want a website? What are you hoping that's going to give you? Oh, because websites are great. No, but like, what are you struggling?
What's the point?
Yeah, and actually having a proper sales conversation, understanding like what you're trying to get to. So that was the first big light bulb moment. Is that
when you start doing that, you're taken more seriously and you're trusted more.
Yeah,
and you ironically probably got more business because of it, right?
Yeah, because they're like, hold on, why are you asking questions? Why aren't you just selling me a website? So that the first thing was like really understanding what are they trying to achieve here? Because often the thing they were trying to achieve had nothing to do with the website. They had this idea that if they had a new website and all of a sudden it was all flashy and shiny, 100 customers would just rock up because they got a new website. And then you go into the analytics of their existing website and they get like 3 visitors a day. And I'm like, it doesn't matter how good this website looks. This is not going to get you 10 new clients a week. Do you know what I mean? So it's like really understanding what they're trying to achieve. And then the second part of that was, if I only got paid when I helped them to achieve that, what are all the things that I would have to do to ensure that I got paid? And it just totally just like changed my perspective
Great example.
Like
so
how do we get the outcome? And obviously a lot of that stuff literally is out of my control. Like if I don't know how to run paid ads or SEO, but what I can do is go back to the client and say,
you need this.
Yeah. And say, actually, like, I'm not happy to take on this job because what you really want is 10 new clients a week. And all I can give is a website. So unless you're going to do PPC or like, what are you going to do to drive traffic? And they go, oh, I hadn't really thought about that. Then all of a sudden you're like the expert.
That's why you're extraordinary. And then you separate yourself from the competition. You literally step out of line and all these other guys fall away. Yeah. Because they go, okay, this guy wasn't willing to take my money and actually looked after me. I'm going to go back to him when I figure this out. Or I'm going to use him to help me figure out a solution. Yeah.
And you get seen as like a creative problem solver rather than just a gun for hire.
And that's what technically every service should be, especially if you're in a service-based industry and you're part of a puzzle. You need to understand the puzzle for you to be able to educate your clients properly and know that it's going to be a good investment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Dude, this has been such an interesting conversation. I hope we get it to do again sometime.
Of course. Yeah, thank you.
Where can people find out more about you? Where can they find out more about your, I think it's the financially
free filmmaker program.
Financially free filmmaker, which is a bit of a mouthful.
Yeah, triple F.
Triple F.
There we go, triple F, very easy. So yeah, I think that I'm most active on my Instagram. So I think timf.matthews, pretty simple. Just head there. Yeah. Always respond to my DMs. So feel free to ping any questions over. And I mean, link in the bio, as they say. Like and subscribe.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Dude, absolutely.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Mate, thanks.